All right, Alex Pereira winning the title versus Israel Adesanya is one of the fastest rises to the top of the sport of all time. And it came just 53 weeks, which is 371 days after making his Octagon or UFC debut, of course, at UFC 281 on November 22nd. He won the UFC title in only his fourth UFC fight. What only adds to this accomplishment is that Izzy was a top 3 pound for pound and one of the longest reigning middleweight champions that the UFC has ever seen, and as we know, he got the job in round 5, a stunning knockout victory for Alex Pereira. Alex, as we know, is still a rookie in mixed martial arts, only 8 fights in a record of 7-1. Yes, he started training in MMA in 2015, but his major focus was still on kickboxing as recently as 2021 when he became a Glory 2-weight champion. Now listen, it took me 25 fights and 10 years to win my first ever UFC title. So, maybe there's a little hint of jealousy here, but here is my list of the 5 fastest rises to the UFC world title in the modern era, which is UFC 28 and onwards. Number 5, Brock Lesnar, who became the UFC champion of the world in only 287 days, and he won his UFC world title in only his 3rd fight. His 3rd MMA fight of all time. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. He made his UFC debut at 1-0. He had a fight in K1 in Los Angeles. He beat Min Soo Kim, defeated him, and then signed with the UFC. In his UFC debut at UFC 81 in February 2008, well, guess what? Welcome to the UFC. You've had one fight. You're fighting Frank Mir, a former champion. And yes, he lost in the opening round to Frank Mir via knee bar, and he went mental at Steve Mazzagatti because he thought Frank Mir was able to hold on to knee bar for too long. But in that fight, he showed crazy speed. He showed crazy power. The NCAA wrestling, of course, and he won his 2nd fight in the UFC versus Heath Herring at UFC 87. Now, of course, that did set up an iconic title fight versus Randy Couture at UFC 91 in November 2008. Brock Lesnar was 1-1 in the UFC. Dana even joked about it at the press conference that this could have been a bit of a mismatch. But as we know, if you saw the fight, Brock Lesnar knocked out Randy Couture in round 2 to become the UFC heavyweight champion of the world in only his 3rd UFC fight and his 4th MMA fight. Number 4, Holly Holm. She became the UFC champion after only 261 days into her UFC career and became the champ in only her 3rd fight. Now listen, Holly Holm, if you know her, prior to the UFC, she was one of the most accomplished female boxers of all time, but she was also working on her MMA career. She was 7-0 in mixed martial arts when she made her UFC debut at UFC 184 in February 2015. Now, she went out there, she beat Rocky Raquel Pennington, and then she beat Marion Renault to earn a plus 700 shot against Ronda Rousey. Now, 2 fights in the promotion, taking on Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey was the face of the sport at the time at UFC 193 in Melbourne, Australia, in front of an absolutely massive crowd, a ton of hype. Rousey made it kind of personal. They were talking shit, they were going back and forth, and I don't think anybody gave Holly Holm a chance. But she shocked the world in round 2 of that fight when she knocked out Ronda Rousey. It was a vicious head kick that put her out cold, and as I say, shocked the world and became the UFC champion in only 3 fights or 261 days to become at that time the most talked about fighter on planet Earth. Coming in at number 3 in only 231 days, the strawweight queen, Joanna Jedrzejczyk, and she won her fight. She became the champion in only, once again, 3 UFC fights. Listen, she made her UFC debut with a record of 6-0 in 2014, and not unlike Alex Pereira, she had a formidable background in kickboxing, which she suggested that she had the potential to become a future champion. She won her first 2 fights in rapid succession, beating Juliana Lima and Claudia Gadelha, and that earned her a title shot. And she went out there against Carla Esparza and utterly dominated that fight to become the strawweight champion at UFC 185 in just 231 days after signing with the promotion. Coming in at number 2, Quinton Rampage Jackson, and this only took him 113 days to become the UFC champ in only his 2nd fight. Listen, Chuck Liddell was the face of the sport at that time, but Chuck Liddell had fought Rampage in Pride and had lost by knockout. So when Pride was bought by the UFC, they inherited Rampage's contract, and when he signed with the UFC, he first went up against Marvin Eastman at UFC 67, and he dominated that fight, got the knockout. But then the second fight, they did a rematch with the Iceman. I was there, I was ringside, and this shocked the world. As I say, Liddell, he was the first superstar of the sport, the first one who got the ESPN magazine covers, TV appearances on The Simpsons, Entourage, and absolute mainstream media attention. But Rampage, as I said before, he did hold the win over him in Pride 4 years earlier. And like with Izzy, a lot of people expected the champion to be able to get his revenge, but instead, a huge hook ended the fight. The Iceman Chuck Liddell led with a body shot to the body, obviously, that is called a body shot, but when doing so, left an opening for the chin. When he threw there, Rampage, boom, huge left hook, flatlined the Iceman, put him on ice, put him to sleep, and Rampage Jackson, number 2 on the list, became the champion in his second fight after only 113 days with the promotion. Number 1, Anderson the Spider Silva. Yes, of course, Anderson had to be atop of this list. He did it in his second fight, and he did it in 108 days, and my God, did he do it in style. At the same time, I just won the Ultimate Fighter Season 3. I stuck around in Vegas for a few days with Rebecca, my wife. I was ringside watching his debut against Chris Lieben, and let me tell you, what a savage beating. He warned the world. He showed everyone what Anderson Silva was capable of. Even though Chris Lieben underestimated him, he said that Anderson Silva was fighting easier competition out in Japan. Anderson went out there and dominated the hard-headed, tough-chinned, granite-chinned Chris Lieben, dominated him, knocked him out in only 49 seconds. Now listen, the champion at the time was Rich Franklin. He was also a huge star and a big player for the promotion because he had a clean-cut champion. And around this time, the UFC was still trying to shake off this reputation that it was a blood sport. 2-man enter, 1-man leave and all this type of thing. So Rich Franklin being clean-cut imaged, being a math teacher at high school and also being a badass UFC champion. As I say, he was one of the very best, but Anderson went out there and he tie clinched his way to victory, and I gotta say, he made it look easy. Poor old Rich Franklin. I don't think he knew what he was in for. Anderson went out there, beat him from pillar to post, and the knees that he landed in the tie clinch, I mean, they were absolutely devastating. Anderson, as I say, he tie clinched and kneed his way to the belt in just under 3 minutes against a very, very good champion, and that started a record-breaking reign of 2,457 days as champion, but it was only 108 days with the promotion to become the said champ. And of course, we do have a few honourable mentions. People like Jake Shields and Gilbert Melendez, they fought for the UFC belt in their UFC debut, but sadly for them, they didn't win. So they're not on the top 5, baby, but they deserve a mention. Other people like Ronda Rousey, she was the UFC champion in her debut because she was afforded the belt or given the belt because she was the Strikeforce champ, and when they absorbed Strikeforce into the promotion, she automatically became the champion. And of course, we should mention Dominic Cruz, who did it in minus 199 days. And what I mean by that is Scott Jorgensen fought for the newly created UFC title at WEC 53 in December 2010, which was the only time that the UFC put a UFC title on the line at a non-UFC show. Now, Cruz was the WEC champion, he defended that belt, and of course became, as I say, the inaugural UFC champion. He then made his UFC debut 199 days later, beating Uriah Faber at UFC 132 on July 2nd, 2011. But Anderson Silva, take a bow. He stands at the top of the list. Alex Pereira, take a bow. In fact, all you people, take a bow. Winning the UFC championship is a very, very hard thing to do. Doing it in such quick fashion, I mean, come on, that is absolutely remarkable. But what do you think? Did I miss anyone? Did I miss anyone? Let me know in the comments if so. Subscribe, ring the bell. You take care.